Hello and welcome for the Swine Disease Reporting System. This is the report 99 with the finds of April of 2026. My name is Giovanni Trevisan of the Swine Disease Reporting System.
I'm Wilda at the SDRS team.
Hello, I'm Sajan Kumar at the SDRS team.
And today we have the pleasure to have our guest, Dr. Tom Petznick. Dr. Tom Petznick is a private practice swine veterinarian based in Omaha, Nebraska, with more than 25 years of experience working across commercial and seedstock swine system and the other livestock production species. He is well known for his practical, science-driven approach to complex disease challenges, including his leadership in advancing the understanding of porcine sapovirus and other emerging pathogens through the close collaboration with diagnostic laboratories, production, and research institutions. In recognition of his contribution to the swine health and production, Dr. Petznick received the 2023 Allen D. Lemons Science in Practice Award, and we are very delighted to have you joining us to this podcast, Dr. Petznick.
Well, thank you. Those are very kind words. I still, I'd say my hallmark in my career has been the award from the Lehman Conference. But as I look at that, I was like, if you look at it compared to the Emmys, like the acting awards, it's really not, to me, my experience was not that I was the best leading actor. I think it was that we had the best movie. And because it takes the whole team to get the best movie. And so really appreciate everything that everybody's helped me with, whether that's clients, whether that's groups like you guys at Iowa State University. Schick has been a big part. Just all my mentors and everything have helped me get there. But I also think it's important to say congratulations to you guys because I think your next episode is your 100th episode.
Yeah, we're getting there. 100 episodes already. And you are right. It's most of the time it's a team that makes it work, but leadership is important there. So congratulations you for all that you do for the swine industry. We really appreciate also you serving on the Swine Disease Reporting System advisory member and providing feedback for us to get there while we envision this project, keep informing the industry there. We want to discuss with you a couple of endemic subjects there. And just before that, can you provide us a quick update of where we are in terms of detection of enteric pathogens for this month?
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Trevisan. So in April, we've seen that Delta coronavirus and PED activity stayed outside of the expected range. So showing us that there is continued pressure as we moved into the spring. So what we noticed that PED activity is still running higher than usual at this time of the year. And even though when we observe for month-to-month changes didn't shift dramatically, detection levels somehow stay higher throughout production phases. And just to give you some context, that April also marked as the 6th month in a row with high PED activity, which suggests that this isn't just a short-term issue, but something that we've seen consistently since last October. And at the state level monitoring, we've seen that India and South Dakota both reported higher activity for PED. Now, switching to Delta coronavirus, what we've seen is that a gradual increase in activity with overall positivity around 7%. And detection stayed relatively steady for the winter market sites, while the adult sow farm and facilities show a continued upward trend. And at the state level monitoring, we've seen that Kansas, Oklahoma, Ohio, and North Carolina all saw Delta coronavirus activity above expected range.
Delta coronavirus and PD has been very active. On the SDRS data, have seen every year that at this time is when we start to have the decrease going on in the field. Hopefully that repeats this year and we start to see less activity of these two agents there. What you have for us on the respiratory side with PRRS, influenza, and Mycoplasma?
So for this month, PRRS activity show a bit uptick in April, with most of that pressure again coming from the winter market side, where positivity around 44%. At state level, we've seen that Iowa and Illinois reported the activity above expected range. Now, moving to influenza A virus activity picked up in April, and overall positivity roughly 1/3 of the submitted cases, and we've seen that an increase in detection of the winter market size compared to what happened in March, while the activity in the doe cell farms remained relatively stable. As state level monitoring, we've seen that Iowa, Missouri, North Carolina, and Ohio show activity above expected range.
So uptick influenza going on, and also this difference in terms of detection of parvovirus that usually we always saw that decrease either in February or March, but this year has been keeping consistently high for parvovirus. So that indicates that something is different in the field of this year for parvovirus. And Dr. Petznick, we are seeing all this activity of these agents in the field and this virus, and based on your experience and seeing these trends, what is the broader challenge that we are facing in terms of swine production with these emerging things that goes on now, and sometimes they pop up again in the field?
Yeah, and so I certainly I wish I had the silver bullet answer, but I think first of all, it's important that we look at everything in context, and that's where as we can layer in context to the results that we get, the data that we get, and for example, is there anything going on that might skew to say that one pathogen, that this is getting tested more? And it's not necessarily that there's a higher prevalence, but it's just being tested more. An example of that is that in the last year, I have one particular farm that we're doing a project on where I've been in there every single week for a year. We're getting wrapped up and close to being done with that. But then we will take like 80 TOSC samples, and we'll also do processing fluids, and all those TOSC samples get run individually. And certainly, because it's a PRRS endemically infected herd, we know that some of those are going to be positive. And so that can, now 80 samples in the big mix, probably not a big deal, but I think we have to keep it in context. But with so many things, you look at the coronaviruses, we're looking at flu activity, we're looking at PRRS. It just seems like we are in this storm of holy cow, what is going on? We just continue to rise, and we continue to have these resurfacings happen. And I really think that's going to really come down to what's the behavior, not just at the caretaker level, but what's the behaviors that are going on in the farm as a whole, as the system as a whole, and decisions that people have made. Remember, we're not that far off of some of the worst 3 years that we've had in pig production. And certainly we know that producers and systems and the integrators, we all look at what our costs are. So how does that affect our labor? How does that affect our truck washing? How does that affect our vaccination programs, et cetera, et cetera? And so when you start to look at those, I wish we could just, get everybody on a call and say, oh yeah, we quit doing this and we quit doing that, or we adjusted this. But I think we're probably a little bit in a shadow effect of what's been going on over the last 5 years rather than just looking the last 5 months.
Yeah, and that's a very important point that we need to look for the holistic approach of the things. And as you mentioned, the viral is a key component there. But one of the things that you mentioned there is about number of testing and looking for those trends of decrease. And when we look for a specific agent that is Mycoplasma pneumonia, if you look that the testing continues to go on, we have some activity that is detected that in the finishing sites. But if you look for the breeding herd side, the positivity really comes down in a trend that started basically on the 2020 and now reached the lowest level since then. When we look also for confirmed disease diagnosis for Mycoplasma pneumonia, that there is a significant decrease that happened over the last years. And that's not new that we have these trends about eliminating Mycoplasma from the herds. That is also under the US Swine Health Improvement Plan, some initiatives to get that established in Minnesota as a problem. So I want to pick your brain here about what has Mycoplasma taught us as an industry about elimination, long-term discipline about engaging as a system-wide design and eliminate these agents from the herds.
Yeah, I think Mycoplasma, you raise a great point, it's really kind of like it's the success story of the last 10 years. Is that other than I think on a couple of SDRS reports, sometimes Mycoplasma went up a little, but it has been a very strong trend down. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that in the eradication process. Number one, and that probably really started before people got like, hey, we need to eradicate mycoplasma, is where that really started was in the nucleus farms and the multiplication, and it became the expectation that they had to be negative for mycoplasma. So then as time went and invariably different depopulations happen, guess what they get restocked with? And that's going to be with negative stock. So that's help for one. But I think the other thing is we have to look at each pathogen and say it has its pros and its cons to being able to be eradicated. And I think one big benefit of mycoplasma is the ability to reinfect a farm once it's gone truly negative is much more difficult than it is with PRRS, with PED especially. And so I think that's been in our favor. If we got it right, and a lot of good science really drove into that category, and we developed much better diagnostic tools in, for example, tracheal swabs. Is it a lot of work? You bet it is. But is it extremely valuable and very centric to making sure that the eradication is complete? It really is. And I think the other thing that does, Giovanni, is it takes the veterinarian into the farm a lot more. You know, it used to be that when PRRS eradications, and let's say we did either an LVI or a mass vaccination or whatever that might be, you know, on the very early ones, we were much more involved. Now it's almost become like, well, here's the protocol. You guys know what to do. And so I think there's something about having the disciplined approach of someone with that background, whether that's a veterinarian or somebody else with that high discipline, being present for lots of steps within that eradication process. The other thing that we have going for us is we have a at least with a mycoplasma, we have two ways to attack it. We do have antibiotics and we use those, and they work in that regard. And we have a well above average vaccine that doesn't eliminate it, but it certainly drops the shedding and protects the pigs. So I think when you put those all together, that's really kind of been why mycoplasma has been so successful.
That's really interesting of what you said, especially for mycoplasma, you don't see too many reintroductions or reinfections like you see with other pathogens. That you can see with the decrease in mycoplasma positivity, there's so much planning going around in the industry. So now let's go into the PRRS virus. This month we saw some increase in the week to market positivity. But if you look at the big picture, the quarter one of 2026, the positivity is around 45%, which is the highest in the last decade. From your perspective, what do you think is driving this PRRS virus, and what are the PRRS dynamics that you observe on the field today?
Yeah, so yeah, talk about taking a swing. We go from what's been the highest success to what's been the shame of our industry. I mean, it really has. And it's just kept a lot of us up at night. And so, you know, I think there's a couple different things. Is number one, I'm convinced because I see it in my little microcosm, there are some producers that are saying, you know what, right now, let's just keep me as stable as you can. Profitability is good. Maybe I'm not 2% death loss in the nursery and 2% death loss in the finisher, but if you can keep me in the 5 to 10 range from wean to finish, then great. And so they're looking at profitability. In fact, that project I was talking about, that's really what that's been about. The producer said, I need 2 years. Keep me as strong as possible. I realize we won't be free of PRRS, but do what you can. And we've been doing a combination of things of, hey, how do we introduce gilts that are less likely to be shedding, adding virus to the herd as the sow farm got stable? And then secondly, I really think I'm learning a lot more about how important those antibodies are in those piglets. And that's maybe for another discussion. The other thing I think we really have to look at is if you I think producers and the industry will be what fixes PRRS. And the reason I believe that is I think if we took a real honest look and erased all the things in our minds that are important to being profitable, but then saying, if knowing what we know about PRRS as the highest mutating virus ever, as one that we don't have a really solid vaccine for, and lots of other parameters, if knowing what we know today, back in the late 80s, early 90s, certainly into the mid 90s and late 90s, would we have designed the industry the way it is? And I think that's really going to be something that has to get looked at. Everything from, you might have some producers when they really look at it, they say, why am I doing this? I hope not, because that's how shameful it is. We have to get better. But how would I design my farm different? How would I design my system different? But then more importantly, is the industry the way it should be structured to prevent PRRS virus from being as bad as it is?
And in that area, you mentioned that there is a need for producers' engagement there. And we have seen this movement in the US swine industry about this national swine strategy that is being come out from National Pork Board, National Pork Producers Council, and a desire to eliminate PRRS virus. Why do you think the producers are really trying to go in that direction of eliminate PRRS virus from the industry and PED right now?
I think, let me ask you this. So you're saying people tend to be favorable to it, or they're not favorable to it?
Yeah. There is this movement from the industry going that direction, coming from producers. Yes.
Yeah. So if you look at it, it's the most costly disease that we have. It's the most frustrating disease that we have. And I think as our industry continues to shrink, we have fewer players in it. And those players are, if they want to be in this, is the ones that can conquer PRRS virus, conquer PED virus, and keep them out. They will be by far leaps and bounds ahead on cost of production when it really comes down to it. But I think we also like it going back to that is that we really have to rethink it. We look at the things that we've done. We've completely changed the game for biosecurity. I almost feel bad when I say, hey, why don't we try this also? It's like, how much more do we have to do? We've changed the game for therapeutics. We've got lots of therapeutics to help keep pigs alive. And then look at the diagnostics and how much they've changed, a lot driven by what's happened in the field epi program at ISU with different protocols and surveillance methods and all that. But when it really comes down to it, we haven't changed the industry design. But obviously the reason people want to get them done is because of the huge impact that they play and to profitability. And that will help not just the producer survive, it'll help the veterinarian survive, it'll help the packing survive, and it'll keep pork on the shelves at a decent cost.
That's like all the aspects of swine industry coming together for reducing the impact of the PRRS. Along with PRRS, we're also seeing higher activity of influenza, especially in the first quarter. If you compare with the last spring of 2025, it's higher than what we have seen last year. So what do you think is going around with influenza? Is it just tagging along with the PRRS virus, or you're seeing any specific diseases with specific activity related to influenza?
Yeah, and so I when I was younger, much younger, flu was seasonal. It was just like what we're seeing right now, and we were seeing it in the fall, even to the extent that people have put it around, well, is it something to do with pumping manure? Fall was a really big time, and people were like, well, is it something with new crop corn? And then we really went in, especially as the strains diversified, it became a year-round disease and still is today. So this is actually the last probably 6 or 7 months has been more traditional of what I'm used to. I had very low flu activity up until about October, November. And then I had 3 systems that one after the other, just like within 2 weeks broke with flu. And some of those in the same region, even though they didn't really have any ties from a feed standpoint, from a people standpoint, it was just regional. And then then it got pretty quiet again. And then just recently I had pretty big flu outbreak in one of my groups in their farrow, not just in their farrowing, but in their farrow to finish. And so I think it still goes back to one that'll be a really good project, but one huge for somebody to tackle is, I don't know that we've really done it thoroughly, is looking at disease spread and prevalence as per the weather conditions, as far as especially as it relies in and around dust and organic material in the air. So if you go back to through most of 2025 let's go before 2025, is we had about 2 years in Nebraska where we had a lot more disease going on, especially within the herds that I had, and the weather conditions where we would have these walls of dust, with 80-mile-per-hour winds behind them and so forth going on. And then last year it was like we almost fell over because the wind stopped, and we had rain. So dust isn't going into the air. You could drive down a gravel road and you didn't have to roll up your windows. And we just didn't have that massive push. And really we had a very successful year as far as disease goes. And then now it's started back up again this year. And I think that has something to do with it, is those weather conditions, because that particular farrow to finish, their farrowing is very separated by probably 12 miles from their nursery finish, and it blew in and all at once just dropped. And we know that because we're highly surveilled. So one month we're negative, and the next month like everything's positive. So it wasn't just that the sow farm started shedding it again. It was truly like an event that happened in that area.
Well, it looks like everything is interlinked to the weather and the temperatures around. I have one more question to ask you.
Okay.
Could you please explain how do you intend or how you're using the SDRS data in the field, and what are the suggestions that you have for the SDRS team?
You mean as far as how I use SDRS information?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I think that's a really, really important question, because when you look at the SDRS information, it really at its nuts and bolts is data, and we have to transform that into information. And so I take it as a challenge to say, with whatever's trending in the industry, I try to piece that out in my mind. We don't spend enough time just really digesting and thinking through these things. And so what I do is I say, let's look at the epidemiology that might follow that. Let's take PED, for example. And so why are we having an increase in PEDV and a sustained increase? And again, when looking at epidemiology, what spreads PED around? Back in 2019, or I can always forget, but we have to incorporate what spreads PED around. We know that it was a factor of feed mill, and the feed mill being that it was in the plasma proteins and in different products, byproducts of pigs that we were putting in. So we immediately, like, quickly started running away from that. And I know that those companies that make plasma products or make other pork products have now put in a lot more research in that. We also put in more feed mitigation. Okay, so epidemiology would say we got to look at the feed. We know for sure from several studies that transport is important with PED, and that if I take negative trailer to the packer, I have a higher chance of coming back with PED and or PRRS. Now we're learning on that. So what has happened there, and how has our behavior changed when it comes to that? How has our behavior changed as far as with low profitability there for 3 years? Did we reduce our labor force, and we have people that are taking care of more than one facility? How are they trained, and are they doing the steps that they need to do? So I really think that a big value that I find from the SDRS is to take it and ask myself, why is that? As we actually do, and then say, okay, I maybe don't really know the reason, but I know that if I'm experiencing that, the things that I ought to be looking for from the epidemiology standpoint, from how things transfer, how things get infected, that we've learned from the past. And we just have to rebridge that, and then make sure that behavior is refocused. I just heard this morning of a farm in Nebraska that broke with PED, and it's in the general vicinity, general region of one of my clients. And so I sent them a note, said, hey, I know that there's a farm in the area that broke with PED. So we immediately made some recommendations, talked to what's our interconnectedness with people from our farm and that farm, because pig people tend to know each other, and pig people tend to hang out together. And they can practice good biosecurity, but let's make sure we know that interconnectedness piece. We also talked about, are they getting fed by the same mill? So we just started breaking down. We know what causes PED to transfer around. By SDRS bringing that to the forefront, it's forced me to think more about it and say, what steps and has our behavior changed?
That's a lot of good comments on the SDRS and how you use the information in the field. So with that, we wrap up the episode 99. Thank you, Dr. Petznick, for joining us today. See you guys
bet.
next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.